Okay, welcome to session number 2 of Grow Your Health. I'm Kate Homini, and with me is Jess Bowen. And we're going to be talking today about garden maintenance. Jess has some slides there, and then I'll be talking with us about sun safety today. So if we look back on the last week leading up to this, watering and weeding isn't necessarily something to be concerned about because it was freezing and killing everything. And it wasn't sunny, it was snowing, but we're looking forward to brighter days and hopefully setting our gardens up for success. So Jess, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you get us started.
All right, let me share my screen here. We'll get it where it's supposed to be. All right, again, I am Jess Bowen, the Agricultural Natural Resources Educator here in Vinton County for OSHA Extension. And this week we're going to talk a little bit about garden maintenance. Again, we're not quite ready for garden maintenance yet because Mother Nature has not complied, but it's always a good idea to know what we're up against before we start. So we've planted our garden, maybe not. Now what? I hope that if you planted your garden, you covered it up this weekend and last night. My hopes are that these warmer weather that we're supposed to have for the rest of the week is going to stay with us and we won't have to worry about tucking our plants in overnight anymore. But if you planted it, now what? If you're getting ready to plant it, what do we do afterwards? How about that?
Good
So,
one.
first of all, water, right? That's the most important thing is water. So when, where, and how? When should we water? So normally, and I'm a really bad proponent of this, is I will be outside with my kids in the afternoon and I'll think, oh, I really need to water those plants. And it's usually the dead of the afternoon, hottest part of the day, and it just hits me, so I do it. It's not necessarily the best time to water them. Usually it's best to water early in the morning or in the evening. You want to avoid the heat of the day. And part of the reason for that is if that water is on the leaves, it can help promote some scorching on the leaves in the heat of the day and also disease. And we'll talk about a little bit more about water on the leaves later, but really it's best to water in the early morning and the evening. That also helps from the sun absorbing all of that surface water when you water your plants. If it's laying on the surface too long, it's going to evaporate there in the sun and not get down to the roots where it needs to be. So early morning before you go to work or in the evening before you go to bed is the best time. So also another thing to think about is if it rains, which lovely Ohio has been raining quite a lot, and it seems like we're going to rain quite a lot the rest of the week. But if that rain is less than a half an inch, it is okay to go ahead and water right after that rain because you can kind of push that rainwater down to the roots and make sure you're getting all the way down to the roots where those plants really need the water. So don't always think, oh, it rained, we're good, I don't need to water anything. But now if it rains a lot, yes, you're probably good. But if it only rains a little bit, less than a half inch, you might want to go ahead and water right after that rain just to help it out. Also, wilt does not always mean that you need to water. Again, the leaves sometimes really struggle in that heat of the daytime. So if you're out there in the afternoon and you see some wilted leaves on some of your plants in the garden, don't automatically go grab the watering can right then and think, oh my gosh, they're dying because they don't have any water. Come back in the evening and see if they've kind of rejuvenated themselves a little bit. Now, they're probably not going to look perfect, but if they've kind of bounced back a little bit, that wilting was just from the sun in the heat of the day. It does not mean that they're underwatered. Now, if you continue to notice that wilt even in the evening or the morning, then it probably needs some water. But don't always automatically assume that wilt means water. So where do we want to water? Well, first of all, if you haven't planted yet, it's a really good idea to water the hole, which has an extra W on there, but water the hole before you plant, okay? Whether you're planting a seed or transplanting, put some water down in there before you put the plant down. Avoid watering the leaves. So that's what I said we were going to talk about earlier. Not only does it help promote scorching on the leaves if you do it during the middle of the day, but it can also cause or promote some diseases, some foliar diseases on the leaves if you get too much water on the leaves and it stays there. So it's best to water near the base of the plant because most of the time the roots are where that water needs to be, because that's what's helping the plant grow. So because of this, we're going to talk about types of waterers here in a minute, but this advice right here is one of the downfalls of just throwing a sprinkler in your garden, okay? Because the sprinkler doesn't necessarily get the water where it needs to be. It's going to get the water on the leaves a lot, can promote that foliar disease, and is not getting the water at the base of the plant down into the root system where we need it to be. So now we know where we're going to water, but we need to know how we're going to water. So many of us water using a hand watering jug. It's not a big deal. That works really well at helping us get to the base of the plant. And it works well in places that aren't going to be able to be reached by a hose. So again, we have a hose. A hose has many different options. They have the ones that look like a big shower that you can go over the whole garden at a time. Lots of different things that you can put on the hose to use for watering. Again, a lot of those are going to be really helpful in getting us to the base of the plant where that water needs to be. Sprinklers are an option. I would say these are an option if you don't really have time to be out there watering your plants, especially if you put them on a timer so you know they're at least getting water, albeit not really the water in the way we want them to get it, but at least they're getting water. So one of the seemingly more complicated ways to do it, but can be done in a less complicated manner, is drip irrigation. So you can do drip irrigation by just poking holes in a hose and laying it around your garden. It does not have to be super complicated, but this also gets that water at the base of the plant and down to the roots where we need it to be, instead of on the leaves, which can cause us some problems. All right, so we've watered our garden, and hopefully we have really great soil that we've tested in the beginning. So now not only are we growing our garden, but we're also probably growing weeds. So we have several options to deal with weed control. Depending on how you feel about using chemicals in your garden, one way or the other, you have the option of organic weed control. And there are some commercially marketed organic weed control options that you see there. You just kind of have to do your research on each one of them. Some of them are kind of partially organic as opposed to fully organic. Just do your research on what you're comfortable using in your garden. Another organic weed control option is mulch. Mulch can be a pain because you need to switch it out at the end of the year. You don't want a bunch of old mulch in there, but mulch can also help you cut down on some of those weeds. So you can use straw if you don't want to use conventional bark mulch, even pine needles, those type of things. And basically that just kind of cuts off the area that the weeds can grow up. Now they're still going to pull through there, but it can help resist them some, especially if you're going to be using organic controls and don't want to be using a lot of herbicides on it. So organic herbicides, one of the most popular ones is one that includes corn gluten meal. So again, do your research, figure out what you're comfortable with applying to your garden, and stick with that. Another good thing about organic herbicides, or one downfall of organic herbicides, is there's no residual control. Meaning once you put it on there, it's going to kill what it comes in contact with on that application, but it's not going to do anything past that, okay? You're going to have to repeat the application if these weeds persist. There's nothing that's going to be in the ground from this that's going to kill those weeds once they start to come up. So you'll notice on the organic weed control side, I also put manual and mechanical control, right? Because we can be the herbicide. So manual, you pull the weeds as you see them. This is probably more practical if you have a small container garden or a small raised bed than it is if you're, have a 2-acre home garden, okay? That's gonna get a little overwhelming if you're gonna try to pull the weeds as you see them. Now it may not, if you pull them all right as they come up, you might have a good control over it and only have to use manual controls. But the other option is a mechanical control, like the rototiller you see there, a walk behind rototiller. They have powered ones, manual ones, whatever it is. Just make sure you have enough space in your rows. And sometimes you can leave enough space in between your plants if you have a large enough garden to be able to continue to till in between them. And that basically just flips the soil over and kind of kills those weeds because they don't have any space to grow anymore. But again, both of these things are going to have to be repeated throughout your growing season. They're not a one and done situation. They will be continuously repeated until you harvest. And probably after you harvest as well, or you're going to have a giant weed field when you go back to plant next year. So, and then we have our conventional herbicides for weed control. And by conventional, I mean these are chemical herbicides. Often these do offer us better control over our weeds because they've been formulated for it. The thing that you have to watch with conventional herbicides is your residue times. There's a lot of them that can't be applied within 15 days or 14 days of harvest, those type of things. Again, do your research, read your label, whatever you are comfortable with using in your food garden is what you use. Also, you have to watch, a lot of these are leaf type specific that, so you need to watch what you're spraying near the plants that you actually want, right? You don't want to spray the weeds around the plant that you actually want and end up killing the plant you want because it was also targeted by that herbicide. So again, do your research. I won't recommend one type over the other. It's very dependent on what weeds you have, what plants you have that you want to keep. Do your research, and if you need to, call me and I would be happy to help you walk you through that. So my biggest tip for weeds is control early and often, okay? Hopefully you'll have a nice blank slate when you get ready to plant your garden. And hopefully you keep that blank slate throughout your gardening for the season, right? So if you're out there, you know, right now, maybe we can all be out there every day keeping control of everything. But the reality is we probably don't have time to be out there every day. But you need to make it a priority if you want a successful garden to be out there often to control those weeds, because otherwise they will overtake your garden and you will not have a garden in the end. So that's my easy chunk of garden maintenance. I feel like there's a whole lot more to it, and I know that, but weeds and water, if you can get those two things right, you're going to have a pretty decent crop by the time it comes to harvest time. So as always, if you have questions, comments, or concerns, there's my email, and we're still answering our office phone number. You can get to me that way. Feel free to reach out, and I will hand it back over to Kate.
So when we think about gardening and we think about health, a lot of times we're thinking about how the plants that we're growing are going to benefit our health through the different nutrients and whatnot. Today, I'd like us to talk about health and gardening from how can we keep ourselves healthy while we're gardening, specifically talking about being sun safe. So we don't need to answer this question out loud right now, but how would you rate your sun safety? That's going to look different for everybody. Some of us have very strict guidelines for ourselves on this is how I dress when I go outside. This is what I put on my skin when I go outside. Some of us are not really thinking about that yet, so it doesn't really matter. And we'll all kind of rate our level of sun safety differently because of those factors. So think about that for a couple seconds and keep that in mind as we're talking today. I'm talking about this today for several reasons. The first of which is the fact that skin cancer is the most common type of cancer that we as humans are going to face. It kind of makes sense given that the skin is our largest organ, so there's just more opportunity to run into skin cancer there. About 20% of Americans in the course of their lifetime are going to develop skin cancer. So we have our little cross-section of skin here and a little pop-out box that shows the epidermis, or the top layer of our skin. And you'll see kind of at the bottom here, this kind of purplish column of cells, basal cells. So if you know anyone who has ever been diagnosed with basal cell carcinoma, it's just cancer that's originating from those cells. That's the most common type. About 80% of people who are diagnosed with skin cancer are diagnosed with basal cell carcinoma. And it's typically found on our ears, our face, our head, areas where we get a lot of sun exposure. Squamous cell, which are basal cells, kind of work their way up towards the top and become squamous cells later. Squamous cell carcinoma makes up about 18% of skin cancers, found in the same places that we would find a basal cell, so ears, face, head, that sort of thing. And then melanoma might be the skin cancer that we're most familiar with. that accounts for 1 to 2% of all skin cancer. And that originates from our melanocytes, or those cells that are producing melanin or pigment. So if you're fair skinned and you have freckles, the areas where you have those freckles is just where your melanocytes are throwing up a lot of pigment. So those cells, as they're exposed to sun and sun damage, that can increase our risk of developing skin cancer. And the last point here, sun damage is cumulative. So sometimes we'll go outside and we'll get that sunburn and we're really focused on, oh my gosh, yes, I just damaged my skin through this. But then with time, the burn fades, maybe it turns into a really nice tan. And then even, for us here in Ohio, as the winter drags on, we lose that tan too, so we forget what has happened. But that damage stays kind of below the surface. Ohio State has an educational machine, more or less, called a dermascan. So we can sit down and I can view someone's skin. I've viewed my own skin through this. And there have been a couple of occasions where I've done it where I was having a very good skin day, no blemishes, my skin wasn't dry, anything like that. And I looked at it in the machine and I went, oh my goodness, like I could see the damage left from previous sunburns I had had. So it's kind of unsettling, but it's a really good reminder that what we do today is going to affect us long term. So practicing sun safety now is going to prevent any damage in the long term, which might be increasing our risk for skin cancer, or just for pure vanity issues. That damage might lead to more wrinkles and lines down the road. So everything we do now is going to prevent that kind of damage later. Sometimes people will say, well, I get what you're saying about sun safety, and we want to avoid stuff like skin cancer, wrinkles, all that stuff. But what about vitamin D? I need sunshine to get vitamin D, right? And that's true. Sunshine with our skin does create vitamin D, which we absolutely need. Research has kind of shown us that for fair-skinned people, if we're going outside for about 10 minutes a day, 3 times a week, that vitamin D that's being produced, is enough. It's sufficient. It meets our recommended guidelines. If someone has a darker skin tone, they might need to be out there for 30 minutes, 3 times a week. So it doesn't take a lot of sun exposure to get what we need. People will say, well, what about germs? Sunshine kills all the germs, right? It's the UV rays. It's not the sunshine itself. It's the UV rays that kind of will kill germs. But putting on sunscreen, protecting your skin doesn't affect how the UV rays can, kind of eliminate some germs on surfaces we might be touching, or, stuff in the air. And then finally, well, what about mood disorders? If you've heard of seasonal affective disorder, individuals who aren't getting enough sunshine or natural light in their lives may start feeling like they have depression or other mood disorders. And the really cool thing about this is it's not exposure to the sun. So it's not being out there having those rays hit your skin that will elevate your mood. It's receptors in your eyes that pick up the light and starts producing serotonin, which we need for kind of like happy, feel-good chemicals. So just being able to look out the window to sunshine is enough to kind of produce the good reactions that we want. You don't have to be outside exposing yourself to UV rays. So if you're looking to take some steps and kind of protect yourself from any sun damage, the first thing we can start off with is clothing. If you like to wear hats, that's a great way to protect your head. If you choose hats that have a nice brim, so about 3 inches around, that will protect and shade your face. It's especially important to protect and shade your ears and even the back of your neck. If you are someone who likes to wear a ball cap, so I have a couple of family members who absolutely live in baseball caps, throughout the summer. That's great for protecting the front of your face, but don't forget to add some sunscreen to your ears and your neck because you're not getting sun protection from that hat in those areas. That's why you'll sometimes see the hats that have a wide brim on the front and then they've got the flap down the back, so it's protecting ears and protecting the neck. I didn't make a bullet point of this, but we have our sunglasses here. You can absolutely damage your eyes with UV rays, so wearing sunglasses when you're outside is especially helpful. And if it has kind of the wider earpieces here, like these sunglasses, that'll do a good job of kind of protecting, sun from getting into the side of your eyes. Wearing long sleeves or long pants. So with this, you're basically just putting a barrier between the UV rays from the sun and your skin. Dark clothing is better for this because the darker colors will absorb the UV rays. Synthetic fabrics are better. So polyester or nylon, they're typically a tighter knit, so the rays don't have a chance to get through to your skin. And you can also add treatments to your clothing. So these are products that you would just add a certain amount to a wash and it'll get on your clothes, and it's just an added layer of protection. That treatment will usually last about 20 washes for your clothes, so it's a nice long-term solution. And if you have clothes that you already like, it's great just to add that layer of protection so you don't have to go out and buy like a second wardrobe that's marketed as sun protective clothing. Now, I will say that the idea of wearing dark, long sleeve polyester clothes in the middle of summer is not something I'm going to do, especially because like in July, that's like a recipe for heat stroke. So I turn to sunscreen, and a lot of people turn to sunscreen as their defense. There are two main types of sunscreen. So you have those chemical barrier sunscreens. Those are probably the most popular ones in the market. If you have those spray on sunscreens, those are usually always a chemical barrier. And these are just different chemicals that when the UV rays hit your skin, it kind of breaks up those rays and it's just released as heat from your body. The UV rays don't have a chance to get to your skin and start causing that damage. These are great for people who are swimming and people who are sweating a little bit more as they're working, just because that sunscreen is absorbed into the skin, so it's not as likely to be brushed off or washed off. The downside is that it is a chemical you're putting on your skin. So for some people, there's a sensitivity issue, and it might cause a rash or a breakout. And for other people, it's just a concern. The evidence is kind of out as to how much it really impacts your skin and if there are any long-term side effects to that. So pros and cons there. Physical barrier sunscreen. If you are familiar with sunscreens that kind of leave a white residue, that's what is happening there. Physical barrier sunscreens, it's exactly like it sounds. It's an actual layer on your skin that just prevents the UV rays from getting to your skin. So zinc oxide is a common ingredient in these. These are great for people who are wanting to avoid chemicals and for people who have sensitive skin. The downside is that it can leave that white residue. So some people are hesitant to use it because they don't want to have, I don't want to look like I didn't rub it in. And it is, the physical barrier sunscreens are harder to kind of rub into your skin. They may feel a little bit greasy, for lack of a better word. The other downside to these is that they can be washed off more easily. So you might have to apply sunscreen more frequently if you are trying to use a physical barrier. So whether you're using clothing or sunscreen, it's just important to remember that timing is everything with this. So between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. each day, the intensity of the UV rays are at their highest for that day. So if you can work earlier in the morning or work later in the day, those rays will be a little less intense. So there's kind of a spectrum of like, if the UV rays are at this intensity, you can be outside for this many minutes before you start to see skin damage. So by gardening earlier in the day, you have maybe a little bit more time you can work before those rays become an issue, or they're just less intense. So they're, you know, your protective factors will go a lot further, basically. And then applying sunscreen in a timely manner. So if you're looking at SPF and it says SPF 5, 10, 30, 50, whatever, the numbers don't have anything to do with the length of time you can wear it. The SPF stands for sun protection factor, and then the number is just saying to what degree. So SPF 5 gives you 5 times more coverage or protection than if you walked outside with nothing on. And then SPF 30 is 30 times more protection than if you walked outside with nothing on. It's still recommended that regardless of SPF, you're replacing it every 2 hours, more if you're swimming or if you're sweating, because whether you're using chemical or physical barrier sunscreens, if you're sweating or you're swimming, it's just going to wash off faster or be wiped off faster. So at least every 2 hours, more frequently if you're engaging in some of those more active scenarios. So let's go back to that question we asked at the beginning. How would you rate your sun safety? I know that I've been talking about sun safety with my job for about 5 years now, and I have certainly started to pay more attention to how often I'm wearing sunscreen. I'm more mindful of, you know, avoiding those peak hours, all that sort of stuff. So I know for me personally, my sun safety has increased from when I was in my early 20s. But even as I'm putting together this presentation, kind of reminding myself, I'm seeing some areas for improvement, like really making sure I cover my ears with sunscreen or a hat or something like that. So yeah, just a question to keep in mind. And again, you know, we're always here just to be presenting information, and that is for you to take and decide what you want to do with that. So, you know, just kind of gauge where you are and see what, if any, steps you want to take to protect your skin. So again, if you have any questions or comments, you can get in touch with me. This number here is my work cell phone. So we'll have that in the video link later. But thank you for watching our video. We hope you picked up some useful information, and Jess and I will be back in about 3 weeks on June 2nd. I'll be talking about food preservation, and I have the notes behind me on what Jess is going to be talking about, but we'll announce that shortly.